I'm Shar Banerjee, and this is Books That Built Me. I'm an ex-executive turned to leadership coach, specializing in people managers. My job is to get people out of their manager headspace and into their leadership growth space. I typically work with clients to build leadership DNA and self-leadership muscles in either group programs or one-to-one coaching. But on this show, we're going to dive deep into the stories of other leaders. And it all starts with a book that they believe has fueled their passion, influenced their decisions, and turned book lessons into life lessons. Welcome to Books That Built Me. Today, I'm in conversation with Tamar Gaffin-Cahn. And in today's episode, we're going to be discussing the book Bittersweet by Susan Cain. I'm so glad you can join us. Here we go. Welcome, Tamar.
Thank you for having me again.
Yeah.
I'm so honored to be your second guest.
Yeah, we were just talking about how you are my second guest. And for anyone listening, this book actually was your first choice.
Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of read the back of it and I said, oh my gosh, I don't know if I'm ready to talk about leadership from this perspective, like from a bittersweet perspective. And, you and I kind of kept in touch and you're like, no, there's something here. And I think that, this is the thing that I need to talk, like it's coming out.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, well, challenge accepted. Let's do this book. And so I'm so grateful that you stuck with me because there is magic in this book.
So much magic. I mean, I'm grateful that you were willing to like talk about it, because all I've wanted to do since the first time I read it, and now I've read it twice, is talk about it.
Oh my God.
And like, I want to read it every 6 months or every year. There's just so much here, and it's for any time of life, for any role, for any time you can really learn something from this book. It's really powerful.
So it's so interesting that you read it 2 times. You read it recently for this recording, but then you read it previous to this. When was the first time that you read it?
Good question. Maybe it was about a year ago.
Okay.
Probably. Yeah.
Okay. And did you find that in rereading it within the year itself gave you more or kind of reminded you of what you took away the first time?
Absolutely. And I think one of the biggest things for me from this book was acceptance of being bittersweet. And that it just, every time I reread it, it gives me deeper sense of permission all over again.
I think it would be awesome, Tamar, if you could, in your words, define what Susan Cain means by bittersweet.
Ooh. I think she means there's like this acceptance and melancholy and longing that humans have. And it's in our DNA, it's inherent to who we are, and we can't ignore it anymore. And I think that's what she's really getting at, that this understanding of what bittersweet is acceptance of, we can have so much sweetness and goodness in our lives, and the opposite of that is to have a little bitter, and that's okay. And you can't have one without the other. And that's what makes us whole, right?
Yeah.
That's what makes us human.
Yeah.
And going back to like your leadership work, we're all human. We work with humans. Leadership is a human thing. And so you have to understand bittersweetness to be a good leader.
Yeah, 100%. So the way that she, I think, introduces the concept of bittersweet, because it is a new, I would say, thing or dimension through which you can look at people and understand the world, right? And I love that she brings on the analogy of listening to music and how pop music can make us dance in our kitchens and make us feel lifted and happy in the moment. But a sad song can really transcend all of that and kind of make us want to touch the sky. And she uses music as a really great way to sort of enter the space of speaking and thinking about bittersweet, where she says there's this longing, this craving for something deeper in your soul as you hear a sad song, like the way you connect to it, who you become. The number of times humans listen to sad music over happy music is another indication that there is this tapping into that's like calling on the human spirit.
Yeah, absolutely. I love how she starts with talking about Leonard Cohen and that the sad, melancholy music that's just moving. And I'm not sure if there's a better word for moving. It's
Mm,
profound and it propels you, and there's a level of connection that you have with who you are and with other people, that we all experience this.
yeah. And she says it's like sweetness with a side of bitter, right?
Mm,
It's like to be happy with the inclusion of what it means to look under the hood,
mm,
behind the happiness.
yeah. It makes me think about like all these wonderful moments that I've had in my own life, and people would always tell me to like savor the moment.
Yeah.
And so I started doing that. And then I would get sad,
Yeah.
right? And I would be like, oh, I only have this moment right now, and it's never going to happen again with
Yeah.
this group of people
Yeah.
in this place, you know? And so like the happiness and sadness were always paired together.
Yeah.
And it made the happiness better because I was able to recognize how good something was, because I was like, this will only happen once.
This will only happen once. I actually highlighted that in one of the chapters where she
Mm-hmm.
talks about impermanence.
Mm-hmm.
Impermanence is what once was will never be again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What once was will never be again. And I think in her context, she was talking about grief,
Yeah.
but there's so much sweetness in
Mm-hmm.
even, hanging out with a friend, or in your example, there's that celebration and that joy and the just the pure, you're in the momentness. And then right under the hood, there's this like sadness because you're not, it's almost over, or it's here and it will never be here again.
Right. And
Yeah.
she goes into that also later when she talks about like she has this whole chapter about mortality
Yeah.
and whether or not humans should or could kind of live forever or extend our lifetime. And her message is that maybe we shouldn't, because knowing that death does happen makes us appreciate the life and the goodness that we have in the moment. And I think that's like exactly true of what you were just saying, that we appreciate the goodness of what is because we know it might only happen once.
Because it may only
Yeah.
happen once. Yeah. I have a feeling, I have a suspicious feeling that when you did the quiz in this book, because there's a little quiz, and all of the questions kind of indicate your level of bittersweetness.
Yeah.
I don't exactly know how she defines it, but what's your score? Can we talk about that for a hot second before we get into this
Sure.
further?
Absolutely. My score was pretty high up.
Yeah.
Um it was maybe it was like probably close to 80% or something like that. Um but there were a few questions that I was like 1,000% yes, but I
Mm,
didn't say a hard no for a lot of things
yeah.
either.
Yeah.
Um, and like a side note, like I think she also mentions in the book, and when I first got introduced to the book, it was actually through a Brene Brown podcast when the book
Oh,
first came out, and they both talked about being like very bubbly people, which like
yeah.
I identify, like I'm a very energetic, I'm a people person, and yet, right, I still feel like this bittersweetness,
Yeah.
and um and it's like very grounding for me.
Yeah.
What was your answer?
So my score was high too.
Mm-hmm.
Not as high as 80%, but it was around the 67%. I got a
Mm-hmm.
6.7 out of 10.
6.7.
Well, she gives you the math. She's like, this is how you do it, and this is how you score yourself, and you divide this number by this number. But
It's
anyways,
true.
she
Okay.
basically says that if you score above 5.7, you're a true connoisseur. Oh, she has such
Mm,
delicious words. You're a
mm-hmm,
true connoisseur of the place where light and dark meet,
mm,
which is her definition of what, you
mm.
know, life in land of bittersweet is. And
Yeah.
you know what? Thank you so much for saying the thing about I am like this, because I
Yeah.
am like that too, Tamar.
Yeah.
Where on the surface, if you don't really know me, I am so out there, positive to like the nth degree, and joyful. And there's a side of me that stays in the shadows. There's a side of me that thinks and reflects and goes deeper than the happiness that I protrude outside.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the words you used so aptly was permission,
Mm.
because it's the definition of new concepts that give the pathway for people to sort of discover themselves in a different way.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I was in a conversation with somebody and we were having this conversation. I wasn't reading this book, but we were having this conversation on, do people tend to default on sad or do people tend to default on happy? And we were going through our list of friends and we were saying, I think this person is more happy by default or this person's more sad by default. And now I wish I had the wisdom of the book to take with me, because the words happy and sad are so surface level
Yeah.
and level one of the emotional spectrum, the scale. And I wish I had the wisdom of the book to inform me that having the happy mixed with the sad, like for lack of better word, but sort of having like that swirl
Mm.
is intensely important, because you can't be one of those things without
Yeah.
the other. And
Yeah.
sort of bringing them both into the experience of how you show up as a human changes everything for you.
Yeah. I remember many years ago when I was at like early adulthood, and I was like in social situations and I was trying to figure out how I know if a friend understands me.
Mm,
And one of them I realized is how I like to be given advice, or like something along those lines. And what I wanted and what I continue to want and love is when people say something along the lines of, yes, it's hard. Yes, you have pain, and you will get through it. Or, and you also have these other positive qualities. If people come to me and they're like, you're amazing, this, all these like positive stuff, I'm like, you're not understanding that there's also, I don't want to say darkness, but there's a level of challenge here, and acknowledgement of that. To me, that's empathy. To me, that's like the advice that I like giving is, and like receiving is, yeah, the situation is really hard. This is a hard decision to make. You're
mm,
in a between a rock and a hard place, and you have the skills to get out of it.
mm,
And you can pull yourself out, and you are resilient in all of these things. And ever since that realization, I have found more people in my life that can be honest with me about that bitterness,
mm.
and recognize that, because if you live in a fully sweet world, to me that's not reality.
Yeah.
There are people that are in pain. That's reality.
Yeah.
And there's really a lot of goodness in this world. That's
Yeah.
also reality.
Yeah. What you're calling on, I think, is almost like emotional agility,
Mm,
right? Does that kind of resonate? Yeah, where it's
yeah.
like you're holding difficult emotions and thoughts loosely. So
Yeah.
you're there, you're holding space for it,
Right.
and you're courageous in facing whatever may come.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That and she talks about this a little bit in the book as well when it comes to leadership, that some of the best leaders are bittersweet.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, literally, I like have this pulled up. It's on page 140. I've
Really cool.
140, like
Yeah.
close to the bottom. She says, but melancholic leaders tended to have more personal power.
Mm,
To me, that hit so much because I I've had supervisors before that would never say anything negative, and I'm like, give me reality. If you tell me reality, that it's hard and we can get through it, I will be more bought in. But if you're just only positive, I'm like, you're missing something. You're unaware of what's going on.
yeah.
And so that just really hit me hard, because it just rang true to my experience and the kind of leaders that I
Yeah.
appreciate and I will follow.
Yeah. There's
Yeah.
actually, I just had to flip forward because
Yeah.
you were talking about feedback, and
Mm,
feedback crossed with bittersweet is such an interesting
mm,
play for leaders, right? And she says this so beautifully, which is that a person giving feedback cannot be mindful of the recipient's equilibrium
mm,
unless the person who's giving the feedback, they themselves have achieved their own form of equilibrium.
mm.
right? Because there's so much of a leader holding back and saying, oh, you're not going to want to hear this, or oh, you're going to hate me, or oh, I
Mm.
don't know how to say the words to break your heart. But if you haven't gone through the work of balancing dark with light and playing in that space and kind of living in the dark to see the light more, or kind of just like shying away from the light in order to, see more clearly in the dark, you're not going to be able to do that for the other person.
I hear vulnerability there,
Yeah.
that to be a good leader, you have to recognize the bitter and the sweet, which is inherently vulnerable. If you
Yeah.
only recognize the sweet, that's not vulnerability.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like there's this, yeah, emotional agility, there's this balance, there's an equilibrium that good leaders have to
Yeah.
hold on to.
And I mean, we're talking about good leaders, but it's also like good organizations.
Mm-hmm.
There's this part where she talks about businesses, right? We hear businesses often talking about innovation and collaboration and inclusivity. But there's this part in the book that says safety holds hands with fear. You can't know
Mm.
safety without knowing fear. Innovation holds hands with failure.
Mm.
Failure is the bitter part of sweet, which
Right.
is innovation. Collaboration holds hands with conflict,
Mm.
and inclusion holds hands with difference. And so that I thought was such an incredibly powerful way of bringing sweet into so many different layers. Yes, within you, but you by yourself. Yes, in a relationship between you and somebody else. And yes, in the system of what it means to be an effective and whole
Mm.
organization.
Mm.
What has been the one part of this book that you easily were able to take and turn into a component of your life that
Mm.
is critical to the way that you exist now?
Shar, you asked the best questions. Um, I think there are two things. One, it's acceptance
Mm.
and language of this resonates. This is who I am. This is what I need. Um, the second is another story, and this just like popped into my head that just hit me like a pile of bricks. Is a story about I'm blanking on her name, but she's a violinist, and
Oh,
the story goes that this world famous, one of the best violinists in the world, got her hands on one of the most incredible violins. And of course, it was a very expensive violin and it was very wanted by a lot of people and ended up getting stolen. Um, and she talks about how, and Susan Cain interviewed her and talks about how, like, this violinist and the violin had this powerful connection, which, like, I don't have that much of a powerful connection with material things, but if you are a world class musician, I understand. It's a
yeah. Just
different
to provide some
relationship.
context,
Yeah.
she refinanced her home
Right.
in order to be able to afford the purchase of this violin. And this violin, the first time she met it, she talks about it like it's a relationship, like she found the one.
Yeah.
Yeah, like they're
Yeah.
connected. It was a relationship
It was a
almost. It wasn't even
relationship.
an object to her. It was
Right.
her second half of music.
Right.
Yeah.
It was so profoundly her.
Yeah.
Yeah. And spoiler alert for all those listening, um, the violin gets stolen,
Yeah.
and she eventually, like, they find it, and um, but the story goes is that, like, she didn't want the violin back after they found it, and she talks about that the violin went on its own journey and it's not the same violin as it was before. Their relationship would have changed. Both of them had gone through traumatic experiences. One, the object was stolen and it had gotten to the hands of lots of different people potentially. And as for the violinist, she had a broken heart, and she had not been, she's a changed person. And so it makes me think of all the different relationships that I've had in my life, and accept them for what they were, and not necessarily need to go back to them.
Yeah.
And, like, I'm a Taurus, I'm a loyalist, like, and so I struggle with that in my own life, and the acceptance to say that was a really great experience and I'm so grateful and I wish them the best, and it's okay that we've both moved on.
Yeah.
And so that I have to remind myself of that. And this story is really powerful. And it's just, ooh, it's one of those, you just got to take a deep breath after it.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
as you're retelling the story, and I'm hearing it for the second time because I read it the first time and I'm just kind of feeling those feelings again. I remember thinking that there was growth behind
Mm.
the sadness too, because she was depressed for 2 years while it
Yes.
was stolen from. She looked away and she was playing. She looked away and it was gone. And they didn't find it for 2 years. And they said that she stopped playing music
Yeah.
and she didn't leave her house for 1 or 2 years or something like that. And that no matter what instrument she held, it wasn't the same. And so she got out of that and she was in the pits of sadness and darkness, where, by the way, this musician did nothing in her life apart from playing music. Like, it was the definition of herself that she had to rediscover in the darkness. And so, what I'm remembering now as you're saying the story is that there's growth,
Mm.
you know? And it kind of just reminds me of like soil, like when you plant a seed and the seed can't see anything. But from the perspective of the seed, like, it's all dark. It's all dark, it's cold, it's wet. There's no sunshine, there's no light, there's no breeze, there's none of that great stuff that's gonna come.
Mm.
But you almost have to trust that this is exactly where you need to be
Yeah.
and work through it in exactly the way that you need to work through it.
Yeah. It's the bitter.
Yeah.
It's the
It's the
bitter.
bitter.
Yeah. Was there something, I mean, since I've read it twice, was there something for you that was just like knocked you over and you're like, oh my God, that's what I needed to hear?
Oh, this part I may cut out, but this part I may cut out only because I cried when I got to
Mm.
the part on mortality. And as you know, my
Mm.
friend
Mm-hmm.
passed away.
Mm-hmm.
And when I read the part on grief and mortality and what once was will never be again, um, I just went into like a day
Mm.
of just, I don't know, hearing my friend in the trees. And that was very, very, very
Yeah.
like it just touched
Yeah.
the heart.
Yeah.
Um,
So both of us have unfortunately lost a friend recently. And this might make me cry, but I'm here for it. Um, my friend was a nomad and she like moved around a lot. And she posted this on Instagram after she decided to move to a different city. She was here in the Boston area and decided to move. And she was this incredible writer. And she talks about impermanence. And she wrote, "What if a going away party is a celebration of impermanence? A friendly reminder that we won't be here forever. I'll miss yous become thank yous for the times we've shared." In Chinese philosophy, Wan Fen means fate between souls. It's the thing that brings two souls together across X number of lifetimes. I've had 3 going away parties in the past 2 years. Each time I'm reminded of the role of Wan Fen. The truth is, we're not meant to stay fixed and rigid in our relationships. Our lives are constantly ebbing and flowing in response to so many layers of stimuli. Heck, we could die tomorrow. We just never know. But while we're still here, let's enjoy this ride together and help each other when we can. And why not throw some warm and cuddly going away parties at the end of it? Funeral reference, anyone? So, I mean, that I'm at a loss for words, but that happened. And then I reread this book,
yeah.
and the level of peace that I feel thanks to understanding impermanence has helped my grief so much.
Yeah.
And I'm I'm grateful for my friend. I'm grateful for this book. I'm grateful to be able to finally talk about this book. Um, and just the sweetness in the bitterness, the sweetness is really, really sweet.
Yeah. Yeah, there's this part in chapter 8 where they talk about a Japanese Buddhist poet.
Mm.
Do
What
you remember
page?
that part?
Yeah.
Oh, what page? 180.
Okay. I want to be there with you.
Yeah, come here with me. Yeah.
Mm.
And there's his name's Issa, and he's one of Japan's great four haiku masters. And he's a heartbroken poet because he has so many kids, but they just never make it.
Mm.
Um, and so he wrote this poem because he was unable to accept impermanence. And they talk about how impermanence is the heart of human suffering.
Mm.
So this is the part that, really touched me.
Mm.
And he talks about how he concedes that water can never return to its source, nor scattered blossoms to their branch. But even so, the bonds of affection are hard to break. And he writes this haiku, which is, it is true that this world of dew is a world of dew, but even so, dot, dot, dot.
Mm.
And this whole poem reflects his struggle with accepting everything in this world is impermanent.
Mm.
It doesn't exist. It's not going to be forever. And so I think this is the part of the book that made me pause a
Mm.
lot and really take in the words because very much like you, this book happened to me
Mm.
after the passing of a very good friend. And it needed to be read at the time that it needed to be read. So
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you for the wisdom
Mm.
in your infinite power that you brought this book to me when I needed it the most.
Yeah.
But even so.
But even so, yeah, there's a lot of magic here. And I mean, she talks about magic, not like witches, but like getting in my head here. But I mean, there was something that I thought of earlier that made me think of like the magical time where light and dark mix.
Mm.
And she talks a lot about different religions, and she
Yeah.
talks about Judaism. And in Judaism, the day starts when nightfall hits, and we have all these ceremonies when that happens. And often it's lighting a candle, like Friday nights for Shabbat, we light candles. But what's even more profound is maybe the separation between Shabbat, the Sabbath, Friday night to Saturday night, and then to the rest of the week. And we light this like really big, beautiful, braided candle with this like giant flame, and it lights up a room, and it's really beautiful. Um, and it's a celebration of that we get a day to rest, and it's different than the rest of the week.
Mm.
And we get the sweetness of that day, and then the bitterness of like, oh, you gotta do stuff. You gotta live your life. You gotta work. You gotta take care of the kids. You gotta do all these things. And that moment of Havdalah, which is what the ceremony is called, is magical. I remember um, one time being with a rabbi who had like 8 kids, and he said, "This is the only time that my house is quiet,"
Mm.
and that stuck with me like 10 years later. And yeah, I think magic is the right word to use. That there's this something special and sweet and holy when you combine bitter and sweet,
Mm.
darkness and light.
I have chills.
Mm. This is a good book.
It's a good book. Yeah. Wow. There was one
Mm.
other moment I remember in speaking with you about a different thing. And I remember you saying, It was about something that had happened to you, and you said, "I like to sit in my anger."
Mm.
Do you remember that?
Maybe, I don't know.
And you were like, "I like to sit in my anger more." And that I actually thought of you when I was reading this book and thinking of that thing that you said. I'm like, "Yeah, she
Mm.
does." Because it's sitting in the bitter.
Mhm.
That's what that is.
Mhm. It's acceptance, and it, like, allows me to, like, process and understand why I'm angry or why I'm frustrated.
Yeah. Yeah, instead of pretending that
Yeah.
I'm fine now. Oh, I'm fine.
Yeah.
Moving on.
It's right. That's not good for anybody.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like there's denial because that's what this is, right?
Mm.
You say acceptance, and the opposite of that is denial, which is, oh, I'm fine. Everything is fine. I
Right.
think the other thing that people play a lot is the distraction card. Oh,
Mm.
like this not what I want, and therefore I will not pay attention to it. So I
Mm.
think the other thing you said at the start of this thing was permission,
Mhm.
right? And I think permission is the most beautiful word that you can grant to anybody sort of listening to this, is that it allows you to just stay. You
Mhm.
don't have to move on too quickly. You don't have to get over it too quickly. If there's a wound, you kind of just let it bleed a little.
Yeah.
You don't have to fix it right away.
Yeah.
For somebody who is listening to this podcast and has not read this book,
Mm.
what would you say is one actionable takeaway that they can do in order to lean into what it means to live a bittersweet life?
Sit in the harder moments a little bit longer. And sometimes what I tell myself or I do for myself is because I don't always want to be in the bitter. And like I want to get be clear that like I don't like sitting in the negative or in the bitter. Um, but what I tell myself is be in the bitter, be in the angry for 5 minutes, get out that emotion, and then move on. And if I can't get out of it, then there's something else we need to shift or adjust or like take a look at or something that something isn't aligned and it's not like necessarily my ego being hurt and I need to just get over that. And so sit with it, accept it a little bit more. Mm-hmm.
There's this part in the book where they talk about acceptance of bitter, and it's the 7 skills that they
Mm,
talk about. Do you remember that part? Yeah.
yeah.
And I think a lot of what you just said is so inherent to this part. It's page 95.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can see you looking.
I'm like, where was that?
It's
Where
page
was
95.
that?
But yeah, they basically talk about
Mm,
the acceptance of bitter, which I love that was your one big takeaway, Tamar.
yeah.
And she breaks it down into the first 5 skills of accepting bitter, which is to acknowledge that it's happened, to embrace the emotions that accompany it, which is the second one. The third one is to accept all of the feelings, even ones that are unexpected or may seem inappropriate or whatever, just like to accept it in all of its glory. The fourth one is to expect that sometimes there will be overwhelm. And then the fifth and final one is to watch for unhelpful thoughts. So those are the five skills involved in the acceptance of the bitter. And then there are 2 other skills in the 7 skill steps, which basically enables you to move from
Mm-hmm.
bitter into sweet.
Mm,
Mm. So the sixth one is connecting with what matters and realizing that the pain can actually point you to the people or principles that matter to you the most and to give you meaning in your life. And then the last one is taking committed action, which is acting on the values. Like, how gorgeous is that?
mm-hmm. The meaning keeps standing out to me.
Mm.
And it was just a reminder that I've always got work to do.
And don't we all?
Yeah, don't we all, right?
Don't we all? Yeah.
Yeah.
We're all a work in progress.
Mm-hmm. And it's that process. I mean, the trusting the process of life, trusting the process of like different moments and different challenges. And I think that's probably another thing that I've accepted from this book is that bittersweet allows me to go through the process of life with my emotions.
Mm. To go through the process of life with your emotions, not in spite of,
Right.
not hiding from,
Right.
but with your emotions.
With. They're with me whether I like it or not, you know? Like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so you have to work with them.
This is one soulful book.
Ooh.
That's a good way of putting it, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's full of soul. Will enrich your
Full.
soul. Thank you, Tamar, for this amazing recommendation. Thank you for staying with me.
Thank you for giving me a space to talk about it because all I've wanted to do is talk about it for like a year.
Wow. Wow. And talk you did, talk we
Yeah.
did.
Talk
Thank
we
you.
did.
Thank you again for sharing this incredible book.
Mm.
Before we cap off this episode, what's another book that you would recommend to the people here? A book that you feel has built the Tamar that we now know?
Um, I'm this is not necessarily an answer to your question, but I'm about to start reading The Artist's Way, which I've received a lot of like power, like I've heard a lot of really wonderful things. I'm literally 6 pages in and I'm like, I need to like sit down and like think about every sentence that is said. Like it's like that powerful of a book. And so I'm gonna slowly work my way through that.
Okay,
So I'm excited.
I have to say, not only are you the first second guest, but you're the first guest who is highly recommending a book that you're only 6 pages into. I love it. I love how you just break all the rules, Tamar.
Sorry.
I know, that's great. It's great.
Yeah.
Thank you for being with us. I so enjoyed spending time with you, and as always, it's been such a pleasure.
Such a pleasure. Always, always, always. I really just appreciate all the goodness that comes out of these calls and podcasts and your thoughts and just like your warmth that you hold this space is just beautiful.
You're
I
beautiful.
appreciate you.
Oh, I appreciate you. And that's it for this episode of Books That Built Me. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave us a review. It really helps support what we're up to. Thanks for listening, and you can always find me on my LinkedIn at Char Banerjee. If you're dealing with a leadership challenge, I'd love to hear from you and have you join our community. And of course, I'll talk to you next Tuesday on a brand new episode of Books That Built Me.